Hey everyone, welcome to another Office Hours with Dr. Roy Casagrande and myself, Jeremy. Hey Roy, guess
Hi,
what?
Jeremy.
We won.
Yeah, isn't that great?
President
cool
Donald Trump announced recently that we have won.
Yeah.
And that
He
we're...
said we won on day one, even.
Oh, well, that's even better. That's the best. The best
That's the
that
best.
the bestest that there's been. So
Yeah.
what do we...
So this is our victory podcast.
Victory podcast. Woo! So
Yeah.
so we're done. So Iran has stopped flying drones at UAE.
No.
Wait a minute. What do you mean no?
I don't know how many things were flying around today, but I was woken up by them, and yeah, we're still getting alerts on our phones, so something's still happening. And every once in a while, we hear the bang.
So the IRA hasn't heard that we won yet, I guess.
Apparently, Iran doesn't know that they've been defeated, and so the Islamic Republic is still lobbing stuff at us
Oh, well, that's unfortunate. I guess
and hitting ships in the Straits of Hormuz.
and mining. I did see that they were mining, laying mines, not mining, laying mines,
I
laying
understood
mines.
with you, man.
Yeah, in the context of war, not in the mountainous regions for digging tunnels, they are laying mines in the Strait of Hormuz. I think the U.S. has reported that we've destroyed mining vessels.
Yeah.
It seems like one of those, I'm not sure which one is completely accurate. I'm sure they both are probably true, but maybe not. So I'm not there. I can't not validate. I can't assess these without some kind of bias from the sources. So U.S. military sources. Go ahead.
I was going to say Trump did say that he hopes that the crews of the ships in the Persian Gulf will stop being cowards and go ahead and go through the mined waters and get hit by missiles as they're doing it. So it's so cool of him to be brave for others,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a mark of a true leader.
Mark of a
Selfless,
true leader.
sacrificial of other people.
I mean, he said that, right? He said, some of you are going to die and I'm happy to make that sacrifice.
Yeah, and I have seen that there's what is it? Short-term pain, long-term gain. Has this kind of like this has been spreading in the news that that specific term. Which what is the long-term gain here? I still have yet to figure that out. I don't think there's long-term any long-term vision for this at all. So anyway, so we have talked a lot about U.S. war politics, regional war politics with Israel, and the possible escalations, and what the new regime or the dynasty now and the Islamic Republic might do. Let's take a step back to try and understand the aerial warfare and the potentiality of toppling the regime. This is something that you want to talk about, I know, because you sent me messages, but can you enlighten us and educate us, Professor, on the history of aerial warfare?
Okay, so this is going to be shocking to some of you. And so I just need you to sit down, take a deep breath, whatever you need to do. But we've only been doing aerial warfare for 115, 116 years. So I'm going to let that sink in for a moment. All right. So we don't have a big, population of events if compare it to horse warfare. We know a lot about horse warfare because we've been doing that for 4,000 years or so. So in this particular instance, the amount of the sample set we have is limited. Having said that, in many ways, we've been experimenting. So that's in large part what happened in World War II. There was a bunch of experimentation in aerial warfare. And so even though it's, there isn't a giant amount of history here, the experiments really do seem to point in one direction. As far as I know, and I could be wrong about this, but as far as I know, the first application of aerial warfare was actually during Mexico's revolution in 1910. And what was happening during the revolution, right? This isn't the revolution for independence. This is the revolution that happened 116 years ago. What happened was, airplanes had just been around for, what was it, 5 years, and the both sides of the Mexican Revolution had them, and were using them initially for reconnaissance. So they just fly over the enemy and come back and make a report. And then at some point they began arming bombs, and then they would just throw them out the cockpit, because these are those biplanes that were cloth and wood. You had an internal combustion engine in the front, but the rest of the plane is just fabric wrapped around pieces of wood. And, the cockpit's wide open, you're wearing goggles, and you just arm the bomb and chuck it. So that, as far as I know, that's the first time anybody ever bombed anybody from an airplane, was during the Mexican Revolution. Then, of course, World War I breaks out while the Mexican Revolution is going on. And when that happens, both sides begin using airplanes as well. And again, they... at first they were using airplanes for reconnaissance, and then eventually somebody went, I could just throw a bomb out the cockpit and bomb these guys. And then, of course, they started dogfighting each other, because they would pass by. Initially, they would just shoot at each other with a pistol, and then over time, they mounted a machine gun on the front and would shoot at each other. Think of what they had to do to make it so that the bullet wouldn't hit the propeller, so that it would just pass between anyway. Because that seems reckless to me.
An interesting aside. So a couple years ago, I did an archaeology project in North Fort Worth, because they were building a neighborhood there, I guess. But they found, as they were proceeding with this project, that there was this weird shaped trough-like thing in the ground. It turns out it was in the shape of an airplane, and this was a World War I training area. It was on the ground. The shape of an airplane, old concrete. The whole area was littered with bullets. So we were doing a survey of the area, and this was a training grounds for British pilots in Fort Worth, Texas, because the weather was more stable here, so they could train all year round. But when I was there, I found the base of a clip of a British machine gun. That was, a machine gun that a soldier would carry. So they were just strapping these things onto the aircraft, which is fascinating.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So British pilots were training in Texas, strafing this little cutout on the ground. But so this is interesting. Just thinking of, they were the ingenuity of like, hey, let's strap machine guns onto these things. They didn't even have machine guns designed for the aircraft yet.
Yeah, that's wild. So, okay. And then in World War I, the Germans decided to up the ante and thought it might be interesting to bomb London. There's no way for the Germans to effectively bomb London with biplanes. What they did was they actually launched dirigibles, and then they had a group of guys in the basket throwing bombs out of the basket from the dirigible onto London. I believe that's the first time a city was ever bombed in warfare. After World War I ended, the British bombed Baghdad in 1920. And the reason is because the British Empire was conquering Iraq out of the Ottoman Empire and adding it to the British Empire. And the people of Iraq weren't interested. They didn't want to be part of the British Empire. So the British bombed the city. And so, when you bomb a city, that's an act of terrorism. By definition, that's the goal. You're attacking civilian targets in the city with the hope that it'll upset the civilians enough they'll put pressure on their political leaders to do whatever you want. Well, that's the definition of terrorism. Warfare is when you bomb military targets. Terrorism is when you attack civilian targets. So that's what they did, and they kind of succeeded, right? The Iraqis submitted, and the British conquered Iraq and added it to the empire. As far as I know, that's the only time that worked. But having said that, it wasn't an aerial attack. It also had a ground invasion. So it was both aerial and ground. So they were bombing the city, but they were also on the ground with soldiers. Then during World War II, the Blitz, the famous Blitz, when Germany was bombing the British Empire with the goal of making the British submit, the initial goal for the Luftwaffe wasn't to convince the political leaders to quit. The initial goal was to take out the Royal Air Force. The Germans had a plan. Operation Sea Lion is what's in my head. I hope that's right. They had a plan to invade England, and the goal was to knock out the Royal Air Force so that the German landing vessels could go unhindered. And then if the British tried to come in to sink the German landing vessels, the Luftwaffe would attack the British ships. So you need to establish aerial superiority over the English Channel. And that's exactly what what the Luftwaffe was succeeding in doing. The Royal Air Force was being torn up. The British couldn't make enough planes to keep up. And then the British, Winston Churchill, said some nasty things about Goering and his Luftwaffe. And Goering, being the petty narcissist that he was, said, "Woo, I'm going to show you." And instead of going after the RAF, he started bombing the city of London. And the goal was terrorism, right? I'm going to bomb the civilian population into submission. It didn't work. What it did was it steeled the British people and made them even more determined to fight. And it gave the RAF time to recover. So if Winston Churchill hadn't done that on purpose, it would be surprising. And if he did do it on purpose, it just shows his genius. Like, I'm going to get London blown up so that I can save the RAF. And then, of course, I've talked about other things. Like, for example, I've talked about when Germany bombed Stalingrad and why you don't want to do this before you invade a city. Having said that, we blasted North Vietnam in the Vietnam War. We bombed Hanoi and Haiphong. I mean, we dropped multiple levels of Hiroshima bombs worth of TNT on those two cities. We obliterated the surface of both cities. And what the Vietnamese people did was they dug tunnels underneath, and they built they took the manufacturing that was on the surface underground, and they just kept manufacturing weapons and whatever they needed to fight the war. So it had an effect. It made the Vietnamese more determined than ever to fight. We bombed the hell out of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, completely ineffective. We bombed Cambodia and we bombed Laos, and we committed war crimes and atrocities and crimes against humanity to try and win the Vietnam War by bombing the hell out of 3 countries, and we didn't succeed. We bombed South Vietnam because we were fighting the Viet Cong. We saturate bombed the Saigon military district 280%. In other words, we bombed every square inch, bombed every square inch again, and then bombed every square inch almost a third time. We didn't actually bomb every square inch, but we bombed enough that if you put everything together, it averaged out to almost 3 times. That's a lot of firepower to drop on your allies' capital. So the Iraq wars, both of them, the United States started off with a bombing campaign. In the first Iraq war, the United States bombed Iraq for 1 month. In the second war, we did shock and awe, which is, by the way, the definition of terror. We called the initial operation of the second Iraq war, Operation Terror. We just spelled it out by calling it shock and awe. Like, we're not even hiding that our war on terror was a war of terror, which is insane. So what do we know from all of this? One thing we know for sure is nobody has ever won a war with aerial firepower. It's just not a thing. What ends up happening is people dig in, they go underground, they whatever they're gonna do, they turn their rubble city into a fortress. It always backfires. But there's also never been a circumstance under which we actually succeeded in toppling a government or making somebody surrender by doing it. So one of the weird things about what Israel and the United States are doing going into this is they've sold us this idea, and that the Iranian government was so fragile, all you had to do was bomb it a little bit and it would collapse. And for the record, I kind of bought into it a little bit when in the days leading up to this, I started thinking, okay, yeah, maybe you can just, decapitate the Islamic Republic and people will rise up and maybe it'll work this time. And so I thought there was a possibility, but history tells us there just isn't. This isn't the thing. This isn't how the world works. But again, right, we're only talking about 116 years worth of data. This isn't, 4,000 years of horse warfare that we can look to.
It has worked once, right? And that was
What?
the, Hiroshima, Nagasaki.
Okay, that's actually an interesting point.
I would not call that a conventional bombing, though. That is one time in human history, and we all pray that that will never happen again.
So that's actually way more messy than most people think it is. The United States began secret negotiations with the Empire of Japan in June of 45 to see if there was a way to make a deal. And what happened was we had been firebombing Japan for months at that point. Our whole strategy was to leapfrog across Japanese-controlled territory, capture airfields that the Japanese had built or that were already there, and then use those to get closer and closer to Japan so that we could then bring in bombers and basically firebomb the place, which is what we were doing. So the Japanese already, Tokyo was already largely destroyed. Hiroshima was already largely destroyed. The major cities in Japan had been set on fire multiple times by this point. And they were stuck. And the secret negotiations were stuck. And what they were stuck on was the United States wanted unconditional surrender. And the Empire of Japan said, we can't do that. And the reason the Empire couldn't do it was in Shintoism, the emperor is a godhead. He is a manifestation of a deity. So the official state religion of Japan, Shintoism, had this problem. If you got rid of the Empire of Japan and got rid of the emperor, then the religion had a hole in it. Worse than if you got rid of the Pope, right? In Christianity, there's nothing that specifically says you have to have a Pope. But in Shintoism, you have to have the emperor. So this is a catastrophe for the Japanese. And so they said, no, we can't unconditionally surrender because we want to make sure you don't make us get rid of our emperor. We can't go there. And the United States was like, nope, unconditional surrender. And the Japanese were like, nope, we can't do that. You have to guarantee that we keep our emperor, which means there's a condition. And we were going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And what ended up happening was we nuked them while we were doing the secret negotiations. We nuked them on August 6th, and then we followed up and we nuked them on August 9. When we nuked Hiroshima on August 6th, that city was already 60% destroyed. So we nuked a largely destroyed city. By the time we nuked it, it had essentially no military value whatsoever. It's one of the reasons we picked Hiroshima, is because what was left of the Japanese Air Force was no longer protecting the city. We didn't want to attack a city that had any type of aerial defense because one bomber, one nuke, if you shoot it down, then you just lost your ability to drop the nuke. So we picked Hiroshima for that reason. We picked Nagasaki. It was only partially damaged. It wasn't in bad shape when we nuked it, because it had no military value whatsoever. It was a banking city. It was a garden city. It had art. Historically, it was the entry point for the Dutch and the Portuguese. So it had like a little bit of a historical value. But beyond that, there was no meaningful military application in Nagasaki. So the Japanese Air Force wasn't protecting, what was left of the Japanese Air Force wasn't protecting it. So that was why we picked Nagasaki for the second nuke. Then on August 15, so 6 days later, so if the Japanese were going to surrender because of the nuclear bombs, then you would have thought they would have surrendered on, say, August 10, or maybe they were August 11. You wouldn't wait until August 12 because it looked like the United States was nuking in 3-day increments, right? August 6, August 9. The next time should be August 12. So the Japanese weren't surrendering because they had been nuked. What happened was on August 15, the secret negotiations had come up with a deal. In other words, the Japanese were willing to keep fighting even after they were nuked. They needed a deal. And here's the deal. Japan would accept unconditional surrender. I'm doing air quotes because they got a condition. The United States would announce it was unconditional surrender. Japan would nod and say, yes, it's unconditional. And the condition was that Japan would keep the emperor. The emperor would announce he was no longer a godhead. And the Japanese state would no longer be called the Empire of Japan. It would just be called Japan. So no adjectives in front of it, right? Because we were going to make it the Republic of Japan. And they were like, nope, we can't do that. And so it was just going to become Japan. So, no United States of Japan, no Federal Republic of Japan, no People's Democratic Republic of Japan, just Japan. I believe there's only 2 states on the planet that have nothing in front. And I think Canada is the other one, right? It's not the Kingdom of Canada. It's just Canada. And so that was the deal. And so on August 15, the emperor got on the radio for the first time. Nobody had ever heard him before. He announced that Japan was going to surrender, and he announced that he no longer had this god status. And then on September 2nd, Japan finally surrendered. Again, if they were worried they were going to get nuked, then, and that was the reason they were surrendering, then they surely wouldn't have waited till till September 2nd to actually pull the trigger and finally surrender. By the way, in that 17 days between the emperor announcing and their actual surrender, there was an attempted coup d'etat to overthrow the government by a wing of the Japanese military that did not want to surrender and wanted the Japanese people to fight to the death. And they fail, the coup fails. But that's the extent to which the bombing campaign didn't actually end the war. It was really just they needed a compromise deal, and they got one.
So what you're saying is that the history of aerial warfare is indicating to us that the current aerial bombardment will not succeed in its proclaimed goals in Iran.
I don't see it. Not based on history. Now, it could be that Trump is a super genius and Netanyahu is a super genius and they figured it out. They know the formula and we just need to be patient and watch this unfold. But based on history, based on everything we know about aerial warfare, if they don't send in ground troops, there's no possibility of toppling the state. Now, we also know if you do send in ground troops, it's still unlikely that you'll succeed, right? Afghanistan, Iraq, Vietnam. There's a really long list here of failed offensive operations post World War II. I think if there is a lesson post World War II, it's that the attacker will lose. So I don't know, how this rolls out. I mean, there's an exception, of course, Israel, right? Israel attacked in 1948 and pulled it off and stole a country. And then they won again in 1967. But it's worth pointing out that Israel invaded Lebanon and occupied it to the Litani River and managed to hold on to it for 18 years. And then in the year 2000, were beaten back by Hezbollah. They attacked in 2006 and were beaten back a second time. In 2024, they attacked again, and they didn't really succeed in achieving their goals. Like, it was so bad that at one point they were having soldiers run to the Litani River so they could just try and put their foot in it so they could say they got to it. I mean, what the hell kind of goal is that? And then they did the pagers. So I guess they figured out a way to win in the end anyway. But they didn't, right? Now they've invaded Lebanon again. So in 2026 they're invading Lebanon yet one more time, and they're bombing it, and they've killed over almost 800 people last time I checked. It was 780. They've displaced, I don't know how many tens of thousands of Lebanese. It's there's a history there, but attackers generally don't win, and yet
I
we still
mean,
keep doing it.
yeah, there's just an urge to. I don't know. I don't know why most people attack. Something inside of those who are in control feel like they need to do something. It's like if you have a tool that you've never used and you just really want to use it for something, so you just make up a thing to do. It's like, oh my
I mean, I
god.
think it's why we nuked Japan.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons we've been sitting on, our arsenal of advanced tech, and we're like, we really need to try this out. And we've got people's. It is some people's job to specifically lobby for the use of the tech and any lobbying firm, right? Even whether it's pharmaceuticals or missile makers, AI, what have you. It is someone's job to sell those ideas, both ideologically and literally sell those things so that these products can be bought by whoever. So the fact that this war has started, it reminds me, I forget the name of the movie with Nicolas Cage where he's just going around selling weapons to whoever. And war is good business, right? If you're making guns, missiles, shells, whatever, this is good business for you because everyone's shooting something, which I feel like they're the winners here.
Yeah, for sure.
So, besides aerial warfare, we've talked a lot about U.S. war politics, and politics is bizarre here in the United States as it is everywhere else now. For the most part, I don't want to broad stroke and classify everything as bizarre. But in the U.S., you'd mentioned to me that there are 9 different politicians. Immediately made me think of the 9 rings to the human kings or lords, the 9 Nazgul. Can you? I don't know what the 9 are, so will you explain it to me?
Yeah. So okay. First, I guess you would do the y-axis because the way I think to think of this is a grid with 9 squares, 3 by 3. So the y-axis is the motivation for a politician to get into politics. So there are basically three motivations. It's probably more complicated than this. This is the simplistic version to make this manageable. The first group is the status quo guys. They don't want to make any major changes. They're not here to make the world a better place. They like the status quo. They're probably getting into politics because they want power. For them, this is just a narcissistic trip. They're getting in. They're going to have their power. They don't really even need to exercise it. They're happy with the way things are. The next group are the guys who they like the system. They think it's a good system, but they think it needs reforms. And usually it's to defend the system. In other words, the system is failing somehow, and they feel like it's their job to get in there and make some corrections to the system to get it back in alignment. And then there's the third group. They get into politics because they hate the system. or actually, let me rephrase that. They're ideological. So some of them are in it because they hate the system. Some of them are in it because there's a cause they care about, and they want to make sure that cause is affected. In other words, they don't really care if the system survives or not. There's just this cause that matters to them. So there's the ideological people, the preservers, the guys who want to make reforms to preserve the system, and then the power hungry people who are just getting into it because of the power, right? There's no other motivation for them. The x-axis is how ambitious they are. So to make it simple, we'll do 3 categories. There are guys who are not very ambitious. They want a career, but they're only going to put a limited amount of energy into this, which are the majority of politicians. The majority of politicians are the power hungry guys who are going to put a little bit of energy into it, and they're not going to go, they're not going to end up with a lot of power, and they're not going to get very far. They're happy with that. That's That's good enough for them. But then there's like the moderately ambitious guys, and then there's the extremely ambitious guys. So each of those three categories have, slightly ambitious, moderately ambitious, extremely ambitious. So let's start with the reform guys. So the reform guys, there's going to be the guy who's going to come in and he's going to make a few tweaks here and there. He's not going to do anything particularly impressive. He wants adjustments, or she wants adjustments just to make the system work. So Kamala Harris would be that person. Maybe? No. Obama is that guy, right? He wanted to get in there, do Obamacare, some slight adjustments. I'm not sure about Kamala Harris, but Obama definitely fits into that category. He's nothing major. He's not going to burn the system down. He's not there for, some kind of crazy outcome. Jimmy Carter was that guy. Ronald Reagan would fit into that category, although maybe Ronald Reagan's the middle ambition now I think about it. He wants to get in there and make some changes, but he wanted to make bigger changes. So we'll put him in the middle category. Another person who's in the middle category is FDR. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a firm believer that capitalism was a great system. He represented a faction within the Democratic Party that believed that if some major changes weren't done to capitalism to soften it, so Social Security being one of them, the FDIC being another, that if we didn't do something, that there was going to be a socialist revolution down the road, and that the capitalist system was going to be toppled and the rich are going to be, really sad. And so to protect the rich, FDR came in and he even hired a socialist to help him do this and made some changes to capitalism to make it adaptable. Reagan was elected because he believed that those changes were socialism and they ruined people and they made people less ambitious. And the way to make people more ambitious and harder workers was to take away those things, to get rid of Social Security, get rid of free public school, to get rid of Medicare and Medicaid. LBJ would be a moderate changer, right? He brings in Medicare and Medicaid. A low ambition changer. Reagan and FDR are high ambition, middle ambition reformers. The guys who are on the extreme end are guys who are going to want to come in and do a revolution, right? They're the kind of guys who believe that there needs to be some kind of shake-up moment that just really changes the system. There aren't many people, I can't think of anybody offhand, who are in that category who want to do that because their goal is to preserve the system. So they're not going to go to that extreme by their very nature. So maybe there's only 8. Maybe one of the Nazgul died. Then there's the group of people who are, they believe in a cause, they're ideologically driven. And what they're going to do is they're going to come in and they want to make that cause happen. So Nixon is one of those guys. He believed his mandate was to undo the 60s. He believed his mandate was to return the United States back to the time when he was vice president, when Eisenhower was president, and make America 1950s again, would have been his slogan in 1968. And so that was his cause. He didn't really have a cause past that. He was in that middle category. He was moderate, but he was ideological. Like if your goal is to get rid of abortion, then you're in that group. If that's the only goal, you don't care about the system. You don't want to make major reforms to labor, and you don't care about global warming. You're just focused on this one issue. If your goal is to defend abortion, and again, you don't care about the rest of it, you're still in that group. So it doesn't matter if you're left or right. That's why I'm trying to give you examples from liberals and conservatives. Of course, liberals in the United States are still right. Liberals are center right, conservatives are far right. Today, conservatives have become extreme far right. I've probably said this before, but it's worth pointing out. I have a friend who is conservative, and he's so extreme that like I think Hitler would blush with some of the things he says. And you think, okay, how did the conservatives become that extreme, that far to the right? It's disturbing. But that's been the slow evolution. So then there's the guys who are in it for the power, but again, you have the low ambition, the middle ambition, and the high ambition. George Bush Sr. would be low ambition. He's just in it for the power. George Bush Sr. did some moderate adjustments to the state based on his ideology, but his goal was to really just preserve the system and stick to it. He wasn't particularly ideological. He wasn't particularly driven. He made some good decisions and some awful decisions. He was just sort of middle of the road. Clinton was like that. He wasn't particularly ideological. He offered the country during the election to do socialized healthcare. The instant he got into office, he said it'll never work and abandoned it because it was just a gimmick to get him elected. All of these guys today sound like extremist ideologues, that they are out to change the world. But once they're in power, you find out who they really are. Bush Sr. and Bill Clinton were not particularly ambitious. They liked the system the way it was. They didn't want to rock the boat. Joe Biden, his goal was just to preserve the thing exactly like it was. He didn't need to make any major changes. He put up a fight to get some money to working class people, and he put up a fight to get some money into fighting global warming. But nothing exciting. And he lost because of Joe Manchin. I mean, he didn't completely lose. They did finally get $1 trillion through, but he had a much bigger plan. Was it 3 trillion, 5 trillion, something like that? 1 trillion got through because Joe brought them down. And they named it the Inflation Reduction Plan instead of Build Back Better. Just whatever. Then you can see that you can get a little bit more ambitious in this category. And that's where things start to go haywire. When a person doesn't have an ideological thing, or their goal isn't to preserve the system, the only thing they care about is power, then they begin, and they're ambitious, then they begin to do things that Machiavelli would point to, which is gain power for the sake of gaining power. And I think that's where sometimes the conversation gets lost. So if Kamala Harris had been elected in 2024, she would have been in the same category probably as Bill Clinton, George Bush Sr., and Joe Biden. Just sort of make the system work. Gerald Ford, same category. Eisenhower, the same category. Just make the system work. They're not trying to make any major reforms. They're not ideologically driven. They're low ambition when it comes to power. The problem is when you're high ambition when it comes to power. Now, George Bush Jr. is probably the moderate category. He did get the USA Patriot Act through, which definitely eroded our rights. He basically put us in a state of emergency that we're still in for some reason. And you're like, wait, why is my Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights trashed? I don't understand. Where's this terrorism? It seems like it's all domestic. It seems like our real problem is that there's a bunch of virgin white men with assault rifles running around shooting the place up. Maybe we could just take them to Las Vegas where prostitution is legal and let them have sex for a while so they don't have to shoot up schools and malls. You know what I mean? Like, geez. They could just take all the white men and do a field trip in the senior year and pay for prostitutes in Las Vegas and have a good time so that they can just calm the F down. But anyway, that's my solution.
Or join the military.
Oh yeah, do a universal conscription. The thing is, ideologically, if I did it, I would make it 100% no exceptions. I don't care if you have bone spurs. I don't care if you're a female. I don't care if you're trans. I don't care if you don't have legs. I would make everybody serve because everybody has value. Everybody can do something. And if you're a conscientious objector, I would put you in a nursing home because they're always catastrophically understaffed. I would put you in a hospital where you can treat people. Well, you probably don't have any training because you're fresh out of high school, but you can still be a janitor in a hospital. Like, we'll find something for you to do.
Fun fact about the military, no matter what military it is, there are more jobs than just infantry. So some people don't know that. And it surprises me. There are other things to do. Sometimes your job is paper pushers, or you work at the gym because military installations have gyms. Sometimes that's your job and services. You work at the hotel for people that are on leave or retired who are coming to that hotel. Literally any job you can think of pretty much in normal life, it's also in the military. So I agree with you to a certain extent. Yes.
I have a gym story from a U.S. military base in Germany. So I was walking from the University of Maryland Munich campus on the military base in Munich. And I had military ID. I was a civilian. My mother was a civilian nurse for the Army. And so I was spending my time there. And we were coming out of class, and I was with, there was a couple of GIs that I had become friends with that were also coming out of class with me, and we would talk together. Reverie starts, and you're supposed to stop, and if you're a civilian, put your hand on your heart, and if you're military, you salute. And I refused to do anything. In fact, I decided that time I was going to mock them, and so I started running in circles around them. And a guy came out of the gym, "You communist!" Because there's a pause in the middle of reverie, right? It starts, "You communists, go back to the Soviet Union." He's shouting at me, and I'm like laughing. And then as soon as it started back up, he dove back into the building so he didn't have to stand for reverie. And I thought, oh, you're such a hypocrite.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember that a lot. You're like, oh wait, it's 4:59. Let's just wait inside until it plays, because it plays at 5:00. Let's just wait it out, because then you're just stuck standing at attention, saluting for the whole song, and it's sometimes pretty awkward because you're always supposed to face the flag, and if you don't know where you are or where the nearest flag is, you look around and people are just saluting in every which direction. But yeah, we try and avoid it as much as possible, unless we're in.
And then there's some idiot running in circles around you, mocking you.
And if you're in a car, you have to stop and get out. And sometimes if you don't hear it, and then you realize everyone else has stopped, and you have to realize it's an interesting cultural addition to everyday life. Or if you're trying to get off the insulation as quickly as you can, because as soon as you can hear it going, and you don't have to stop because you're not on base anymore. I have never seen anyone running around other people saluting, though.
That was me.
How old were you?
I was probably 18 by that point.
Okay, that checks. I feel like that seems like an 18-year-old Roy thing to do.
Maybe even 19 now I think about it. Wait, when I was in Munich, I was probably 19. Yeah. So,
you're just a rebel. Just a rebel.
Always.
Speaking of rebels, you mentioned something to me earlier that I don't know what it means, but you said that our current war in Iran is reminding you of Vietnam syndrome. Something about...
Oh, before we do that, I want to just clarify that last type of politician. Trump.
Oh, yes. Wait, you didn't finish that. Okay.
Power for the sake of power. And he has undermined institution after institution after institution. Putin. When Putin got into office, the first thing he started to do was go after the press until he secured it. Once he had it secured, he then went after the governors for the Russian provinces, and he just, I wanted to say cut their balls off, but that's so sexist. He took their power away and used it for himself. Santa Anna did the same thing. He actually went after the governors of the Mexican states. That was his first move. That's what happens when you have this type of person. So when you're voting, most Americans just think ideological. They're not thinking past ideological. And they hear that guy says that he's going to, stop the baby killers. And the other guy says, I believe in women's rights. And they use such inflammatory language and turn everybody against everybody. And they make it sound like everybody's a revolutionary, that once they're in office, they're going to burn the system down and start over again. And then, 9 times out of 10, they're just a typical politician with a low level of ambition who just wants a little bit of power, and they get into office, they collect their big fat paycheck, unless you're a Texas legislator, because they don't get paid much. Actually, a lot of southern states are like that. And then at the end of the day, when the sun sets, they didn't do any revolution. So one of the things that was at stake in 2024, and because most Americans are boneheads and don't think past the obvious, the thing that's in front of them, was we had a situation where there was a guy who was clearly from the non-ideological group, power-hungry group that was highly motivated. So motivated, he tried to do a coup d'etat on January 6, 2021. And yet people still dropped into these ideological lines. So there were people who wouldn't vote for Kamala Harris because they thought she was going to support Israel and continue the genocide that Biden was doing. And it's like, no, every president since Truman was doing this. Well, you still voted for Clinton and you still voted for Obama. How are they any different than Biden? Right? It was just such a nonsensical, ridiculous argument. I swear that if you could get into people's brains, they were sexist and racist. They came up with a dipshit excuse to get out of it, right? Because you can't go walking around going, I will never vote for a black, brown woman. And so they came up with this nonsensical dipshit excuse for, I'm going to not vote for the person who's just going to keep the status quo. Because in that moment, that's exactly what you frickin' wanted. You wanted, whether they were a Demoblican or a Republicrat, you wanted the person who was going to keep the status quo, because the other option was a guy who was going to blow up all your institutions and potentially start a war. And then people will say, well, Kamala was going to start a war. Where did you get your Palantir from that you're looking into it and talking to Sauron and getting all this information about the future? I mean, even Gandalf doesn't know how the future is going to roll out. I'm just baffled by how people have this weird certainty. Why would Kamala want to get into a war any more than Biden did, right? She was an extension of that administration. She was the next 4 years of boring. Biden, by the way, will go down in history as one of our worst presidents, not because he was incompetent or whatever, but because he had one job, and that was to prevent Trump from becoming president, and he failed. He's like that road painter who was clearly drunk, and they left a squiggly line on the road. In this case, he's just geriatric and probably shouldn't be driving large mechanical vehicles.
That was a great analogy.
Yeah, thanks. Everybody's seen it at least once in their life where there's this, you're like, what happened? There was probably a deer and the guy swerved or something, or he really was drunk.
Oh, man.
Or a geriatric. We don't know. Maybe he was 80, old enough to be U.S. president.
So I enjoy. I'm a very visual person. So seeing the grid, the 3x3, so the 9 different areas, it kind of helps me out with like the different levels of motivation versus aspiration. Do you think so? How do you think our political system? Because you're talking about the 2024 election, and we end up with 2 parties in 2 tribal ideological states of mind. So that if you were to, and I've talked to a lot of people who are conservatives, who are, lifelong Republicans, that they will lose part of their identity because their identity is attached to their religious beliefs, their family values, their culture, their tradition. So if they do not vote Republican, they are somehow invalidating their own worth, which is insane to me. Like I would consider myself, an independent centralist, which I don't know what that means these days anymore. But I don't align myself with a political party because it feels like you're deflating your own value. You're attaching yourself to something that is not real. So how do you think our party system and that tribal ideology plays into your 9 different politicians?
Yeah, that's a great question. So labels and identity are obviously super important to human beings. If it wasn't, we wouldn't have nationalism, we wouldn't have religion, we wouldn't have people running around, declaring what their gender orientation was. We wouldn't have tattoos. We wouldn't we wouldn't have flags. We wouldn't have national boundaries, because at the end of the day, when you think about it, that's what we're doing when we list what we are. So you wake up in the morning and you look in the mirror and you go, and then you fill in the blank. And when we do that, what we're doing is we're constructing our identity. And unfortunately, we've done that with political parties. Now, here's a really weird twist. The US had an end around on this. So if you were to go, political scientists love to do these polls. Will ask you really fun questions like, would you be willing to, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, would you be willing to sit on a bus next to a person from the other party? And then the person would say yes or no. And then it would be like, would you be willing to eat in a restaurant next to a person from the other party at the same table? And then, would you be willing to eat it? Would you be willing to bring that person to your home and have dinner at your home? Right? Would you be willing to let your daughter date a person from that party? Would you be willing to let your daughter marry a person from that party? And one of the things that we've been measuring since 1948, when we started doing these kinds of fun surveys, was how ideologically driven people were. And of course, you can do it with race. Right? Would you let a black man date your daughter? Would you let a black man marry your daughter? And you can do it with anything. You can do it with religion. And so you can also test it, like, would you let a Muslim man date your daughter? Would you let a Muslim man marry your daughter? And the answer is no, we're going to kill her in a tunnel in England, in France, by having her crash into a pillar. Was that disproven? Anyway, assassinations are fun because they're always so hard to pin down. And then there's so much denial. So having said that, in this particular instance, what the United States did was it had unideological parties. That was our fix. So if you were a Southerner and you were a conservative, you were a Democrat. If you were a Yankee or from the West and you were a liberal, you were a Democrat. So the Democratic Party was the conservative and the liberal party, which was great because it meant that you had to compromise to get any legislation out of the Democratic Party. The Republican Party, there were a group, there were the only Republicans in the South were black. And of course, Jim Crow made it so that that black population had very little impact on the political system. So if you're a Republican and you had any impact on the political system, you lived in the North or the West. And as a general rule, most of the Republicans in the North and the West tended to be what we would today call libertarian. They probably identified as, they identified as conservative, but we would describe them today as libertarian. You just stay out of my wallet and stay out of my bedroom. So like think of the one state in the union that still is like that is New Hampshire, where they have this, live free or die. And they tend to be a purple state. It's because they've held on to that Republican kind of libertarianness. In the South, most black Republicans in the South back then would have been described as populists. It was the exact opposite of a libertarian. I want you to tell me what I can do in the bedroom. And, oh, by the way, tax the hell out of me so we can have benefits to poor people. So, because they were religiously motivated, so they wanted rules about sin, rules that block sin, but at the same time, they wanted to take care of the poor. So it was, a conservative in the United States today hates the poor, wants them to all die, definitely doesn't want to educate them, and doesn't want them to have any rights, but they're very keen to make sure that they don't do the wrong things, like get tattoos or have the wrong kind of sex and end up in hell. But a populist believes, no, you also have to take care of the poor, right? So Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a Republican to the day he died and fit that category. He was a populist. What ends up happening is the Civil Rights Act. In 1964, when the Civil Rights Act gets passed, it was the Democrats who got it through, which caused the Democratic Party to have a rupture, because Southern Democrats wanted Jim Crow and segregation, and Northern Democrats wanted to end that, hence the Civil Rights Act. Ironically, it was a Southern Democratic president who signed it. And then to make things weird, it was a Republican named Barry Goldwater who pushed back against it and said, no, this is unconstitutional. If you elect me president, I will undo this. 5 Deep South states voted for a Republican 104 years after those 5 Deep South states seceded from the Union, triggering the Civil War because a Republican had won. And so, it was like, whoa, that didn't take long for you guys to switch. And then what ended up happening was Ronald Reagan, 16 years later in 1980, got up in front of the United States and said, the Republican Party is the conservative party, the Democratic Party is the liberal party. It took about 15 years for Americans to buy this, but by the mid-1990s, a huge portion of the population had, and in the South, conservative Democrats started to become Republicans. Once that happened, the ideological divide formed in the 2 political parties. So the system of political parties having an ideology is only 30 years old in the United States. That was never the case. So before, you were a fanatic Democrat, but your friend, you could be a liberal, but your friend who was a conservative, who's also a Democrat, was also a fanatic Democrat, and that was good enough for you. You hung out with them and you ate at the same table, and you even let your daughter marry the guy because he was a Democrat, and that's what mattered to you. Now, it's whether you're a liberal or a conservative that matters. In other words, in the past, it was which hat did you wear? Now, it's how do you want people to suffer? Like what's the limit that you're willing to inflict suffering on a person? And so there's been this serious sort of shift in the United States, and it's all about identity. One of the hilarious things is every time Republicans go, the Democrats are all about identity politics, all politics in the United States is identity politics. Even the Republicans are all about it, especially because when you think about it, at the end of the day, what is the Republican Party base? It's rich, white, heterosexual Protestant men. And if you didn't quite hit all of those targets, you got a few of them, you're still okay.
Yeah. And Trump has actually been really effective at downgrading Republican identities for other Republican politicians who have always been conservative Republicans by just simply calling them rhinos, right?
Yeah.
Republican
right.
in name only. And then people will just be like, you've just lost your Republican identity. Because it's disingenuous because, someone that I hold as, my beacon of my Republican identity has called you out and devalued you, which it is fascinating. I feel like, you remember when the term snowflake was being used to, I guess, say that someone is fragile and complains a lot. Which is hilarious now, because I feel like now that Republicans are in power, that's all I'm seeing.
That's all they do.
This kind of snowflake behavior. I don't even like using that because snowflakes are amazing, right? It's one of the most beautiful things in nature. So I didn't understand that was yes, when they land when you're driving through the snow and they land on your windshield and you just go, oh, you almost crash because you're trying to look at it.
The sun is just set and the street lights have turned everything orange and the snow is falling and it's so quiet and peaceful. I miss that. That's one of the reasons I'm against global warming. Because we're going to really miss snow.
Hey, there'll be some areas with really heavy snow.
Yeah, like Texas.
It depends on the season. Yes. Well, thank you for that answer. That actually was really good at explaining kind of how identity plays into the party system.
Then make it even more complicated and get cult of personality going. And then the identity goes into hyperdrive because now that person is linked not to the political party, not to the ideology, they're linked to the individual. And so nothing you say to that person will go in, it just bounces off. So I just saw where, I don't know if he's even a journalist, there's a guy, I'm pretty sure he's not a journalist, but he's sort of pretending to be, he's got a mic and there's a camera rolling. And there's a woman walking by with Trump 2028 shirt on. And he goes, oh, Mom, do you mind if I interview you? And she goes, yeah, sure. And he goes, I'm just curious, are you going to vote for Trump in 2028? And she's like, yeah, of course, I'm voting for him. And he goes, even though it's against the Constitution. And she goes, I think he's been a really great president. And he goes, even though it's against the Constitution. And then she's like, and walks off. Because it doesn't matter. Law, Constitution, what's ethically right, all of that goes out the window once you've locked in this level of identity into something. And, the last time that happened in the United States was the 1850s. That didn't turn out great. Don't get me wrong. The end of the Civil War was good. Like, that turned out great, but it killed 620,000 people to get there. It would have been probably nicer if we could have figured out a way to not slaughter each other to get there.
Yeah, I feel like that's always the best solution, is to not draft all the young men that we can find and then get them to fight each other.
That's why the Irish are really useful. As they were coming off the ship, depending on if you landed on a southern port or a Yankee port, there was a guy there with your citizenship and a uniform. There was at least one battle in Kentucky where there was a Yankee Irish unit fighting a Confederate Irish unit. That must have been awkward. I think
well, yeah,
I know
especially
you.
If you turn around, you either get shot by your friend or your brother, or you get shot in the back by the officer who's in charge of you. What a time to be alive. And I can only imagine you're receiving a letter from a loved one, like, oh my gosh, like how relieved you must be to just know that they're still alive, or to get back. The amount of damage that was done, it baffles me that we have gotten so far away from that in our mind and in our history. That World War I and World War II, it feels like it's almost forgotten here, which is really sad, I think, because
it's sad and foolish, and it's one of the things that the Russians have done correct. They don't let their history fall away. Their World War II history is constantly brought up, and they constantly talk about it. And I think that connection to history is really, really critical. And so many people have just dumped it. They've disconnected from it. I think a lot of Japanese, for example, have disconnected from their history because they don't want to know about what happened in World War II. Germany refuses to let you not remember what happened in World War II. Everybody has to go to a concentration camp at some point. And, that level of connection to your history is, I think, crucial. In the United States, we don't do this. We don't have a connection to our history, and it's really foolish, and it's dumb.
It feels like we, rather than looking straight into it, we love to put a fresh coat of paint over our history.
Yeah, whitewash it.
Okay, yeah, that's the term, right? And so I always thought that whitewash was just like, cover it in whiteness, but that's part of it.
That's exactly what we do, right? Slavery wasn't that bad. It was good for people.
Yeah. Yes. I know that there are people that, which makes me laugh, that accuse us of like being too like America haters and just completely opposed, which is not true. Like this, you made the distinction between like patriotism and nationalism. The United States of America itself, the country here, is a very unique, amazing, beautiful place. I fought for it for 6 years of my life. You served in the public sector for what, 30 years, teaching kids, something like that. I mean, yeah. So I mean, it's
30 years.
But I think Germany does it right by looking back and be like, this is our history, all of it, instead of just trying to pretend like a lot of it didn't happen, which that level of hubris is very problematic, because we're just going to continue to do horrible things. And when something horrible happens to us, we don't know how to deal with it. It's
snowflakes.
Yes, snowflakes. You mentioned the cult mindset. That is very interesting. I think it helps knowing that us who are not indoctrinated, for lack of a better word here, it helps us understand these other people who are voting, our neighbors, to not like think it's their fault necessarily. They have been indoctrinated by this system that has been implemented very intentionally. It is not.
It has been implemented intentionally.
It's not an accident that people believe the way they do. This has been highly thought out. I mean, we were like the public was warned about this. I think with Project 2025,
Yeah.
a think tank that was laying out the groundwork for like how do we like further manipulate the public and make sure that we stay in power by doing X, Y, and Z and get all of our ideological objectives completed. That's a problem, and I'm not even sure how we move away from that. My point here is like let's not take it out on our neighbors for getting into this. Let's be ready to re-embrace them once they come out of that mindset, instead of blaming people. I mean, at this point, you consider them as victims. Even if you're in this mind state right now, you're going to be extremely offended by thinking that you're a victim of of being mind controlled. Right? But once you come out and you realize the damage that's been done, we're waiting to say, hey, that was hard. Let's walk through this to get back on track instead of blaming you for everything that's happened because you're a victim here. Let's not victim blame people. So anyway, that's all I have to say about that. Do you have anything else before we go into Vietnam syndrome?
Let's do Vietnam syndrome.
Okay, Vietnam. So what is this? What is Vietnam syndrome?
So one of the things that the Reagan guys believed was that the United States population, the United States public, had incorrectly assessed the consequences of the Vietnam War. And so what had happened was the American public had become averse to warfare. They had turned away from it. And so a huge part of Reagan's goal, a huge part of Reagan's objectives as president, was to convince the American people that war was good, that war was great, that everybody should want to have wars. So he began looking for a way to actually trigger a war and then get us a win. He thought that if we could have a victory, then Americans would love the taste of a victory. So he actually began with Libya. He began working on Muammar Gaddafi, and Gaddafi couldn't wait to get on board because Gaddafi was, an attention seeker. He was a narcissist like Reagan. And so to have somebody paying him attention just thrilled him to no ends. And then he could act like he was really, really big and doing cool things. Then nothing really came of it. Then what ended up happening was in 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon. And the Israelis were actually entering into Beirut. And that set off alarm bells for a lot of people because it felt like that was too far. That was too much of a line being crossed. And so Reagan stepped in because he thought, I'm going to do what Eisenhower did in 1958. And Eisenhower invaded Lebanon in 1958. And, for all intents and purposes, got a win. So he thought, okay, I'm going to do the same thing. So he talked France, Great Britain, and Italy into dividing Beirut into four pieces, just like they did with Berlin. But instead of it being the Soviet Union, it was going to be Italy. And they each imperialist state would take a sector of Beirut and then do Israel's nasty, dirty work for it without Israel getting busted for doing the nasty, dirty work. So they invaded. The Italians invaded with hospital personnel, which pissed Reagan off to no end. And he kept berating the Italians, going, what are you doing? This is a military occupation. And the Italians were like, no, we're here purely on a humanitarian operation. We're not going to do your dirty work for you. And he finally infuriated the Italians so much they just pulled out. So then it became France, the UK, and the United States. And then the guys who eventually became Hezbollah, didn't exist yet, drove a truck full of explosives into the Marine barracks and into the French military barracks and killed hundreds of French and US soldiers. And it freaked us out. There were a group of soldiers, I think they were Marines actually, on the way to Beirut. They were in the Caribbean still. They were in transit. And Reagan diverted them and sent them to Grenada, to the island of Grenada. And the excuse they made up to invade Grenada was that there were East Germans and Cubans on the island and it was being taken over by communists. What had happened was the Grenadian government realized they were never going to be rich. They were never going to be able to pay their bills unless they did something. And they thought, we have nice beaches. It's a good climate. We'll do tourism. But to do that, they needed a bigger airport. So they put out and they said, lowest bidder wins. Well, the lowest bidder was this joint East German Cuban company. So they came with bulldozers and shovels, and they're expanding the airport. So Reagan invades Grenada to stop this construction company from spreading communism onto this tiny island with 70,000 people on it. And he got a win. And people were going, USA, USA. Like, he completely distracted the idiotic population that wasn't paying attention to how the world worked. And even though they were still lamenting the deaths in Beirut, there was this, he managed to get a little bit of patriotism flowing. And then he went to bombing Libya, and Libya got back on the radar, and he went after Gaddafi, and it became nasty again. And then he failed, but to succeed. But then George Bush Sr. invades Panama in 89 and then invades Iraq in 91. And that was not the only reason why we attacked Panama and Iraq by any means, right? Panama we attacked also because Jimmy Carter had promised to give the Panama Canal Zone back to Panama in 1979 in 10 years, which for those of you who went to Texas public schools, 10 plus 79 is 89, which is the year we invade Panama. That's not a coincidence. It's to prevent the handover. And of course, Clinton gave it away anyway because he was a communist. Because I know that's what some of you are thinking. Yeah, of course Clinton did. He's a liberal communist. And it's like, no, liberals love capitalism. They're not communists. Stop with that. You should learn what the terms mean. Liberals are center right. Communists are extreme far left. They're not even kind of similar. So then George Bush Sr. also wanted to fight Iraq because he wanted to control the flow of oil. And so, there wasn't the only motivation, but Sr. definitely had in the back of his mind, we're trying to overcome Vietnam syndrome and get Americans to like warfare again. And then, his son takes us into these two catastrophic wars and gets us, I guess, Iraq-Afghanistan syndrome. One of the amazing things about this new war is how ineffective the government has been at selling it to the American people. There has never been a war the United States has entered into that has had this low of support level. And one of the reasons is some people do remember Vietnam. There's plenty of people who remember Afghanistan and Iraq. But also, the other reason is Trump doesn't care. He didn't even try to sell it to the American people. He just did it. He didn't
There was no pre-event that happened. I mean, at least like Iraq and Afghanistan, we were still really amped up after 9/11. Like, we need to do something.
Somebody needs to die.
Afterwards, we realized this isn't the right place. Oh, oops. Why are we here? No, this time it's like, wait, did I miss something? What happened? Like, there was no escalation, and then we were, attacking.
And then, of course, in the case of Iraq in 2003, there was zero reason to attack Iraq also. And so what people like Dick Cheney would do is and George Bush Jr. would do is they would say Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden. And they would keep saying it. So they kept linking the names together, even though they hated each other's guts. And Osama bin Laden had actually put a hit out on Saddam Hussein. And then by constantly linking them together and then doing, all sorts of journalistic tricks, like they had Scooter Libby in Dick Cheney's office leak that Cheney knew categorically that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And then the New York Times took that and published it. And then whenever you would interview Dick Cheney, and it's ask him, how do you know that there are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? He would say, well, the New York Times said there was. I mean, there was obviously that kind of manipulation also going on as well.
It's very clever.
It was very clever.
It's devious, but it's very clever.
And then, the New York Times just went along with it because, well, they're not the most ethical people the world has ever seen. So,
but we don't even have that with this war. There was
There was no attempt. They didn't care.
They didn't
They're
attempt.
just
They
like,
still
whatever.
don't. We still don't know. They still can't give a clear answer as to why we're
Yeah.
doing this and
They've
what
given
the
8
objective is.
answers why we're doing this.
So the Epstein files are coming back into the public consciousness because this isn't the war effort itself. The reason behind it to fire up the American mindset, the public feelings about this is not working. So we're still, now it's more obvious that you're just trying to cover something up, or you're trying to preemptively rig the upcoming election. But we're out of time. We actually both have stuff we need to run off to. So any last thoughts, Roy?
Oh, no, there's just more to cover. We'll cover it later.
Okay. Yeah, so this is how this is going to be for a little bit. All right. Thanks, everyone, for watching. We will catch you next time. Roy, stay safe. And thanks as always.
So for the record, I feel very confident that this is a safe place to be in right now. So I feel more nervous about you, just for the record.
I'll stay safe. I'll do my
Okay.
best.
Bang, bang, Texas.
That's what we're famous for.
Yeah.
All right. Bye, Roy. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone, for
Take care.
watching.
Countdown.
Oh, boy. Oh, boy.